Hello. Good evening to all. I know that all of you are very eagerly waiting for this session, which is Ancient Indian System is the teacher, a coach who facilitates the growth. As you all know, the coaching and the growth is the theme for the year. And you all know that the most of the competency words which we have seen from the ICF and also the coaching world is learning, evoking awareness, trust, and also having a accountability in the actions. So in the today's session, we are actually going to more of discuss from the current state to the state, but more into the learning systems. And also we will be seeing whether learning is only for a purpose. Can a teacher be more effective as a coach? And can also coaching be for all ages? So that we can start that from the curriculum of the school or colleges or institutions. The very important 3 points which the panel will be discussing is how do we understand ancient India's wisdom with reference to learning. The second is how have we applied this in our lives and what we have learned and discovered and disrupted. What challenges, what disruptions do we see emerging in how we learn, educate, and coach? So, gentlemen, I'm very happy to really introduce two eminent panelists here for the Fireside Chat, Mr. Gautama and Mr. Ram Ramanathan. I'll just first introduce Mr. Gautama. Gautama is BTech Metallurgy 1972 IIT Madras, Director Secretary of Palar Center of Learning, comprising Pathshala School, Outreach Programs, and the Krishnamurti Study Center. He is also principal of the school KFI from 1991 to 2009. He guided initiatives such as mixed age learning in junior and middle school, active learning for TNSSA that went to 50,000 classrooms in 2007, a dynamic-wide learning program for high school students, and establishing a short-term teacher training program. The core of his work has been to facilitate a robust and sustainable staff culture so initiative for change can emerge within an educational institution. Welcome, Gautama ji. Now let me introduce Ram, who is well known to coaching area or people who are in coaching. Ram has been doing great work in spreading coaching across the ecosystem. Ram is founder and mentor coach of Kocharia and bring 45 years of experience. He creates proprietary coaching model, designs coaching and training content for Kocharia. As a leadership development coach, Ram works with groups and individuals on co-creation of vision to action plans, strategic performance issues of engagement, and coping with VUCA. Ram held C-suite leadership positions for 25 years, during which he built, turnaround, and oversaw many companies, consulted many family businesses, and also small to medium enterprises, and also non-profit institutions to actually get turnaround. Ram's passion is blending Eastern spiritual practices with Western psychological interventions to enhance personal development in all aspects of work and life. Both are not only passionate in their own areas, but also disruptors in their areas where they have taken lot of disruption on their own. And today they are here to share their experiences, and we are going to have a very good fireside chat with them. Over to you, Ram and Gautama, to take it forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Arvind. Hi, Gautama.
Hello, Ram.
So we are back again in a chat. So let me start, as I said, the ball rolling or the ball lobbying across. When we spoke last time, like you clearly pointed out, originally we were supposed to talk about Gurukul, and you said, why only Gurukul? Why not the largest space of the ancient wisdom? And not necessarily just in our own culture, but multiple cultures. So let me start putting together some thoughts of mine, and then I'll lob it back to you. First, I think one of the, possibly the oldest in the world, the body of scriptures, body of knowledge is the Veda, which is over 5,000 years old. of origin in our country at some point in time. And while the Veda itself was a set of maybe more than 1,000 invocations, ritualistic instructions, and so on and so forth, which was primarily in terms of telling people what to do and how to do, which was more a guideline. And suddenly there was a shift in the way that the education pattern emerged, and which was the Upanishad, which is end of the Vedas and therefore very often called the Vedanta. And very often the Upanishad is translated as Upa, meaning close, proximity, etc., and by the side. Ni means a little lower down, probably the teacher is a little higher than the student, metaphorically. And the Shad is very often meant to be sit. But then when I was researching this at some point in time, the word Shad also means something else. It means discomfort, which I wasn't aware of. And actually, when I thought through it, my own experience has been that any learning is about moving out of your comfort zone, and that involves a certain amount of discomfort. And until and unless you are able to get used to that discomfort and overcoming it, you're not going to be in a new, creative, innovative, larger space of knowledge and wisdom. And the way they did it is exemplified, and I'm very sure that you are familiar with it, with an invocation mantra or shloka that used to be recited between the student and the teachers in every teaching session. And this invocation shloka of the Kenopanishad, actually, which is the Sahanao Vavatu, Sahanao Banaktu, etc. And it ends with a particular word called Ma Vit Vishamahai. The rest of it sort of says, let's work together, let's work with energy, let's work with vigor, let's strive towards creating larger base of intelligence. And in the end, it says, let us not get into discomfort. Very often with Vam Vishamahai is translated as a kind of disharmony, conflict, etc. But another way of describing that is also discomfort. Essentially, what they are striving together to do is to how best can we be still comfortable as we expand from the zone of comfort through a zone of discomfort into a larger system of knowledge. And I'll end with this last, is the process that they followed, in my humble opinion, what was exemplified by the ancient Vedic taxonomy, which is not very different from Bloom's taxonomy, which followed 5,000 years later, which was about Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. The Savana was purely about knowing. Shravana means hearing, but it also means all sensing, that I'm sure you know that. And the next step is in terms of understanding, reflecting, analyzing, synthesizing, etc., is Manana, which is happening through an active reflection of what one has heard, what one has known. Otherwise, the knowing itself is of no value. And finally, the last stage is Nididhyasana, which is a final stage or final two stages of the taxonomy of Bloom's, etc., which is about experimenting and experiencing what happens with the reflected knowledge. And based on that, can you create your own way of how you're going to learn? That's the best way of learning. It's not about someone teaching us how to learn, but it's about us learning how we can learn ourselves. And this was what was built into whatever that system of knowledge was, as you correctly said, be it Gurukul, be it Pathshala, be it Madrasa, be it seminary, be it whatever, all of them followed this. So I just want your thoughts and your opinions on that. Let me lob it to you.
Yep. I think you have begun very beautifully. Let me start with a small reflective anecdote about myself. Having worked for about 8 years or 9 years in various regular jobs, atomic energy research, consulting, I came across this wonderful man called Swami Purnananda, and he was teaching pranayama. I went to learn pranayama from him. I had been already practicing yoga for more than 15 years. And I found that what he taught, what I learned, what it did for me It shook my world. It was a big. I did not know anything about this yoga that he was talking about. He was also very distant. He wouldn't allow people to close, neither would he let people touch his feet. He would not allow anybody to uh, prostrate before him. And he would wear kashaya. At the same time, he would be unapproachable. And after 2, 3 years of this, I found there was a very interesting journey that had begun within me. And I could continue with my engineering as a consulting engineer, do whatever I was doing, or work with this man, learn some more from him. And I decided that I would stop working in a regular job and join him. Work with him, help organizing his programs, listen to him, talk with him. And he would be very equal with me. This was a wonderful 7 years that I could spend with him. He passed away after that. But during that period, one of the big questions we raised always was this. We asked me, what is the essence of the relationship between the teacher and the student? And he would debunk the traditional approach, authority, power over the student. And very carefully he said, on one of the evenings after I had struggled with that question a lot, he said, affection, love, that's the relationship between a teacher and a student. Without that, the rest is all a lot of other things. But that's the essence of the relationship. But this threw everything into turmoil for me because it was not what I had understood till now. I had understood power, I had understood knowledge. And in this journey, yes, certainly, I think, for instance, the Yoga Sutra says, Thera Sukham Asana. In 3 words, you have crystallized nugget of knowledge, wisdom, shared wisdom available. Now, to unpack it, to cogitate over it, is quite a process. There's a linearity in it. You can think about it consciously. But also, maybe, like Kekule, when he was struggling with the problem of the benzene ring, in the night, something suddenly strikes you. And you have an insight into what this could mean. For instance, Sthira Sukhamasanam doesn't talk anywhere about balance, but to have stability, to have comfort, and that's what we call an asana, you have to be balanced, which means you stop fighting with the earth. So this is my insight into it. It has not been stated like that in the interpretation. So I think this process of Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, of when you hear something which strikes you, you don't understand its full meaning, its full import. I think it's a very beautiful process. I think we have a corruption of this when we think that just because something has been spoken, that the other person must immediately understand. Or if you have spoken, I immediately understand. I think the state of not knowing the potential of many revelatory possibilities is a very important thing. I think maybe I should stop here and let you continue with further reflections. I have shared some thoughts on what you have said, and maybe I can say some more as we go along. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me pick the thread up from where you sort of left me with. Of all that you said, the one thing that I would really like to pick up is your reference to yoga. I started practicing yoga when I was a 3-year-old or something with my great-grandfather, grandfather, and so on and so forth. But there wasn't much progress that I made. And much later, after many aborted attempts and various forms of yoga, self-taught and all that stuff, where I sort of injured myself badly in some ways and practicing various things about chakras and so on. I started with a teacher who was formerly trained with Vivekananda Institute, S. Vyasa, amazing person. And So when I started reflecting as I was going through, for the last 2 years, my wife and I have been with him. And the process is pretty painful because my body has become so rigid that any pose that I want to impose on it it's resisting tremendously. It's a process of exactly that learning that we earlier talked about in terms of moving from that state of comfort into a state of discomfort. Then suddenly I realized the meaning of those words. That you have to do it the way that it is meant to be, and you are stable. And as you said, the balance is built into it. But far more importantly, the sukha. So I used to tell him, this guy used to tell me, he used to contort ourselves in all kinds of some stuff, and Parvatasana with one leg up and all that kind of stuff. And I said, look, I'm in pretty much pain, and you are telling me to relax my face and smile. What do you think that I can do in this space? And suddenly, it occurred to me that it's only, I'm performing it only properly when I become comfortable with it, when I'm relaxed. And that is what the meaning of it is. When the mind is no longer focusing on the pain and the suffering, but even if there is pain, I don't have to necessarily suffer. The pain may be mandatory because it's in the body and I can't help it, but the suffering is quite optional. So in learning as well, if I take that further, the very first, going back to what you said about yoga, yoga is about chitti vritti nirodha, which is about stilling the mind, and which is what needs to happen in the learning as well. It's about, am I in a space where I'm free of distractions? Am I in a space which is safe? At the same time, which allows me to take in whatever comes to me in a very detached manner, and then which I can then reflect upon and decide what is it based on my discrimination. My larger intelligence, the buddhi, tells me what is it that I can use it for. So yeah, you beautifully brought in that yoga element into it. And for me, the Ashtanga, 8 parts of the yoga, is something that I build into all my coaching training, as well as in coaching with people. Whether they take yoga or not is a different matter. But the very fact that the physical part of it, the asanas and the pranayamas, are only preparatory to help us to still our minds in multiple ways. And then it's for us to move beyond our senses, the pratyahara, into the samyama process of how do I move from focusing my senses, focusing my thoughts, and finally disengaging from them. So to a large extent for me, the higher level learning, and which is, I know that you're not a coach, but one of the things that we keep talking about in coaching is about being non-judgmental. That our ability to be present in a conversation actually means the absence of our ego, that I'm not bringing my judgment into it. I'm not bringing my biases into it. And in order for me to be able to do that, the only way I can do that is completely detach myself from this experience, but at the same time be completely focused. And earlier, like you said, Swami Purnananda said, it's about the love and affection, which in the coaching terminology, there's a great guy called Carl Rogers who articulated this particular
becoming a person, yeah.
The client-centric, the unconditional positive regard, and the empathy with the total authenticity and the congruence of the coach. So that is what for us is a primal condition that needs to be fulfilled before we start anyway. So yes, the question that I really would have for you is, in your experience working with people of all ages, you have done that many times, and some of the people that you said that you have trained are great celebrities today. And what was your experience, and how, in a sense, let me put it another way, we earlier talked about disrupting the process of learning. I would probably like to reframe it in the sense that I'm not really disrupting anything. I'm disrupting the process of being distracted. I'm disrupting the process of being moved away from what I'm here for but to be able to focus completely on what I'm here for in terms of the learning, which unfortunately does not necessarily happen in the modern methodology of learning. So I would like to hear your experiences in that.
Yeah. Thank you for drawing it back to learning, schooling, education, etc. I brought in yoga only as an example of the relationship between the teacher and the student, as well as Shravana Manana Nididhyasana. In my work as a teacher, in my work as somebody who has been heading an institution for many years, and I've had the privilege, and I continue to have the privilege, enjoy the privilege of being with the Krishnamurti Foundation India schools. This was probably the only religious teacher I know who said, "These are the teachings, tear them to bits," and invites people to question, think, not take for granted what he's saying. And this is a very profound. This has had a very profound impact on our schools and what we attempt. So we have inherited a system of education over the last 150 years, post-colonial, post-industrial revolution, and it looks very solid. Everybody knows that it doesn't work very well. There are all kinds of problems, but yet we accept it and we continue with it. So as a person who would come fresh into schooling, one of the questions that occurred to me was, whoever said that people of the same age learn best when they are put together in the same classroom? Now, I'm sure this is not a new question. I'm sure it must have occurred to people earlier. And in the earlier centuries, when mobility was not so easily available, people sat down, they were near, they could walk across, or they could cross the nearby stream or something and get to the next village, and they could have whatever they called education. But here we have people of all grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. There's supposed to be a progression. And whoever said that this is the most effective way of learning, that you have to be graded every year and passed every year? And I started thinking, what's the right thing to do? I researched what was happening in other schools, in the village schools, in the old schools, and the way music is being taught, the traditions of music, art, dance. You don't have age-wise segregation. You don't have age-wise segregation when you're sitting to learn cricket. Whoever said that you have to learn for academic, you have to be only organized in this way? And I discovered that our own Rishi Valley School was having village schools, which grade 1 to grade 10, and children together, 30 children, one teacher. Beautiful schools. I discovered the Montessori school. I discovered other schools and found that all old cultures had only multi-age schools. So we said, okay, so what happens if we were to kind of make our age-wise segregated school into a multi-age school? We have to move ahead. You can't go back. So what do we do? And sure enough, we did just that. There were colleagues who were ready to work with this, and as a school, we moved ahead. And there were a lot of conversations, a lot of questions. And it was one of the most wonderful things we did. We had to change the way the school class functioned. And one of the parents came and said, "Thank you. My child has a family, has elder brothers, siblings, younger siblings." And we did the same thing in the middle school later, but with completely different processes. So now, what happens when you pick up a question? I think that problem of tradition and the problem of authority is that when you ask a question, you are expected not to find fresh answers. You have to find the same old answers. The older the tradition, sometimes older the pressure on conformity. And I think this is where probably we really need to understand maybe the older systems as well. For instance, in the older traditions of India, learning whatever I understand of it, I think this process of Nididhyasana was not that you will discover the answer in the same words that the earlier person discovered it. That the discovery of an answer is a blood and bones thing. You discover it within yourself. and you discover it in such a way that it's a reality for you. You may not be able to describe it in words, but you can live by it. And I think this is the big challenge of, I read some things on coaching and I know about the fact that people go through an experience where they find validation, they find strength, and therefore they're able to move from there. And I think this connection with oneself, one's own fundamentals, the ethics, and also the certainty, it is not somebody else's knowledge. Krishnamurti talks about going halfway up the hill as mediocrity. Then we become second-hand human beings. And I think the authentic discovery for oneself, is that the concern of the teacher? Is that the concern of the learner even? And the learner may not have that concern when the learner is very young, for the people whom we meet and people whom we see in school. But what's the role of the teacher in creating an atmosphere where this awakening can happen, this awakening of intelligence can happen? Are we concerned with that? Or are we concerned with setting up the organization and making sure that the organization is running? So I will stop there, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, you've thrown far too many pieces at me. So let me try and sort them. First of all, the problem of handling people of different ages, forget about the ages, aptitudes and skill sets and learning styles, is today sought to be mitigated by putting everything into boxes which fit, because that's what the teachers want. It's like packaged good manufacturing, where everything has to fit into a manufacturing line, and therefore anything which is one size big or one size small no longer fits into the quality standards and therefore has to be removed. So the issue really is not about the learning of the individuals. My own experience, exactly like yours, we discussed this earlier. I used to have people, beginners and advanced and everything putting together, and exactly this is what happened. That people who were beginners, they started learning from those who were more advanced in the learning style. So let's say if I were to do a year-long program, it's not so much age per se, because there could be people of different ages coming in as adults from 30 to 60 or more. But in terms of how long they have spent in understanding, let's say, the principles of coaching and so on and so forth. So someone who has already spent about 6 months with me, and now suddenly there's a new person who is joining the cohort and all that. Initially, there was a little bit of, let's say, discomfort. There were people, in fact, I still remember Vijay, who organizes this program, made my life and my fellow mentor Cindy's life miserable by complaining that why did you bring these new people in and so on and so forth. So, but what really happened was there was a tremendous value which each group added to the other. The innocent questions, as it were, innocuous questions of the beginner, made the advanced learners question themselves, relook at themselves, reflect upon what they have learned. And in the process, it allowed the learners at the beginning stage to mentor as well. And so applying it into a regular educational system where you might have, like you and I discussed, it could be class 5 to class 7 or 8 within a certain group, all put together. It doesn't matter. They will all learn, and in fact, they will probably learn far better. Now, which then goes back to your role model in a way, Krishnamurti, because you quote him so often and you quoted time and again, his truth is a pathless land. So as long as learning itself is a pathless land, and we don't define what the end point should be, and it's a journey that we need to experience and enjoy, and that's perfectly fine. But the moment we impose on it certain very, very harsh and rigid parameters, then it robs the joy. Then it's also no longer about the journey, it's about each of the milestones that I have to come to, and that doesn't allow me to rest in peace, and that's what causes discomfort. So we are both completely in total agreement with this, which then requires the entire syntax of coaching to change. And to me today, the focus in any classroom, especially in India, is horrendously on just stuffing people's brains in some way, as if you are a surgeon, you are opening up the brain and stuffing stuff into it. And nothing more is needed. And which is why all these other totally moronic kind of online learning systems have become popular, because the classroom teacher is unable to do that. Now, it's not the same everywhere. I'm not saying it's the best way of doing it, but when we went out of the country when my daughter was in grade 5 and her son was in grade 10, and his first saying, we went to Jakarta in Indonesia, and he started with an international school system. He said, my God, I didn't know schools like this existed. Because what they made him do really was exactly the Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasa. They taught him something, they said, okay, now think about it, and you go and do this project. And everything was about action learning. Winston had posted something on action learning. I know he has done a lot of work on this. So essentially, how do you learn? By experiencing, by experimenting, by doing, and multiple ways. So one of the things that I keep harping on people that I work with today as adults in terms of training them in coaching is, for heaven's sake, all that we do in class is the bare minimum. Beyond that, unless you go out and go and practice and go and really engage yourself in real coaching-like conversation with people who are not part of this learning group, maybe at your work, maybe at family, relatives, whoever it is, who have no idea about what coaching is. Only then you are going to learn. These people don't want to. Pretty much everybody who comes to Coacharya, the first question that I ask is, oh, do you provide facilities for us to gain our coaching hours? Because that's all they are interested. They are not interested in the knowledge or wisdom. They are interested in the idiotic 3-letter or 4-letter labels that we provide. So unless that whole focus is changed. So over to you.
Yes, sir. I think you hit the nail on the head about content and about an extra focus on the end result. And the end result is so many hours of flying, so many hours of coaching, so many hours of teaching, so many levels of teaching, grades, or whatever. Now, you see, I think this over-deterministic approach to learning is a very serious problem. And it's a serious problem for two reasons. One is that the way we want to test something is exactly what we get. Suppose I want to know if somebody really understood something, then I have a series of questions. And people can prepare the answers for those questions. But that doesn't mean they really understand it. The second thing is that you used the word last time about emergence. And I think that's a very wonderful word that I heard from you in our last conversation. I want to use a different word today. Things around us are all connected. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh in one place says the flower is only made of non-flower things. Only made of non-flower things. The flower is made of sunlight, it's made of water, it's made of the earth, it's made of manure. And therefore, the end result is made of only things that are not directly connected with the end result. And I think we don't digest this enough. There are two problems we seem to have. We get so focused on the end result that we can't hold our anxiety about not achieving it. Then the second thing that happens as a result is we tend to ignore all the things that are coming our way because we don't see the connection between that and the end result. Maybe there is no direct connection. What's the connection between the sun and the flower? Direct connection. Or the earthworm and the flower. But the ecosystem, thinking of the whole, and being able to suspend thinking about the end result. being in the process of pursuing a question, being in the process of, when I don't know what can be connected, I'm completely open, listening and thinking and being able to be receptive to people around me. I think success in the worldly sense has been highly overrated and is quite detrimental to human well-being and human growth, I would say. Success orientation means it's an end result orientation. And success is not a moment by moment thing. And I was very fortunate when I was 12, there was my aunt who would have conversations with me about things I never understood. And it was a very beautiful conversation. It left me with a sense that I was worth being listened to. And if you ask me what have I done for the last 30 years, this has been my work, to listen to young people, to listen to my colleagues, and to try and understand what exactly they are trying to say, and do I get a sense of it and have that connectedness with them. I don't know if this is coaching, I don't know if it is therapy, but this is the only thing I can attempt, because somebody is saying something and I don't know from which universe that person is speaking. And in being fully available to that human being at that moment, maybe I'll get a sense of what I need to do. So maybe this ecosystem of providing people the space to experience not just what they think is going to lead them to success, but to what may be part of the journey and may be very important in their journey. For instance, the Aborigine in Australia who used to go on and walk about, he had to learn to live 6 months in solitude. That young boy or young girl, I'm not sure if girls went on it, but certainly boys. And they would have to be open to everything around them. The sound in the desert, the night sky, the rain, the snake in the desert, find a place to sleep where one is set, and be connected with the vastness of life. I think the vastness of life is also something we seem to be losing all too easily. Yes, sir. Over to you. I can go on in this way.
Sure. It's wonderful listening to you. Let me try to connect the last piece of what you said just now about the Aborigines, the way that they learn with nature, and which is the way that our ancients derived their wisdom by the pantheistic philosophy. And to the starting point of what you said about the emergence and the reason why I use the word emergence. To me, coaching is an extremely, extremely simple process.
Yeah, come on, Ram. You're back. I'm glad. I was getting a little anxious and trying to fill time while your connection failed. But anyway, you're back. I'm glad. Go on, please.
Ram, we are able to see you. You can go ahead. Okay. So Gautama, by the time Ram joins, okay, I just want to set up a question. How do you see a teacher as a coach in the terms of language of coaching in the future? And most of the information what you told is resonates with the coaching area, which you talked about the results, correct? It should not be seen, the means and the ecosystem, the whole of the ecosystem. And there is no one point of success. The success is actually doesn't have a destination. So how do you see the future of equipping the teacher, maybe in the ecosystem of teacher, towards this thought process whereby the country can progress or the whole system can progress? How do you see that going because one of the disruptive process you talked about is a mixed age. How do you see that's happening in the future, Gautamaji?
Sir, I think the 21st century belongs to the individual, and I think doesn't belong to the numbers that I think all the analytics try to capture. I think the direction for education is not going to be just based on information, because it's already available everywhere. But I think it's going to be on knowing what is the meaning of coexistence, what is our responsibility, pondering on questions which we don't have meanings for, finding a deeper anchoring. I think we are producing enough food in this world for everybody. but we are not having good distribution mechanism. There are people who are not finding enough food. So we find ourselves in a crisis that we seem to address only by thinking about ourselves, but that's not going to address the crisis. We are not separate from the people around us. And I think there are two responsibilities here. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about the school where I work. Maybe that's because I see its connection. Okay. We started a new school called Pathshala. Pathshala means school in every Indian language. And it is situated on a large campus about 80 kilometers away from Chennai. It is designed with just 120 people, 120 learner educators. We don't call them students. And about 25 to 30 educator learners. We don't call ourselves teachers. We are all learners and we all have a hand in the education of the others. It's an immersive atmosphere, immersion atmosphere, sorry, not immersive. Immersive has got all the connotations of technology. People live together, everybody has a dignified space, people share the work, and the person is more important than what the person can do. I see this as the direction of the future. Today, the person is not important because the person is a good consumer, not important because the person can do all the very special things that the person can do. But I think a human being, the significance of a human being, the value of a human being, and this value we reflect to each other. So in this community, little community of 150 people, which is the Dunbar's number, by the way, the Dunbar's number, which is means that everybody knows everybody. So the number of reflections you get for yourself is a large. In a day, there are 40, 50, 60 conversations that you have with different individuals. And that makes an enormous difference to your life.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah. So let me just finish this thread that I was saying, Ram, and then you can come in.
Sure.
So, in this sense, the human being is of value, and maybe somebody does something better, and somebody does something not as well, but that's of lesser significance. And when you feel that you're not trying to put down somebody, you're not judging somebody, you're able to listen, interact, and learn, maybe then you have life and learning not being that separate. Also, participation is not separate. I heard that coaching, one of the fundamentals is that you are inclusive. And I think that's very vital in human life. Yes, sir. Sorry, Ram, we lost you for a while, so I had...
No, my fault, totally. Okay, I should have anticipated what happened. Anyway, so I was connecting the dots between where you ended in terms of the way that, let's say, the Aborigines and people like that learn, and people learned in the past and what it is today. To simplify coaching, I look at coaching as something extremely simple. It's a journey of a person from a point A to a point B, where at point A, that the person is having some issues to resolve. It could be not being able to achieve something, not being content with something. It could be multiple issues or the current reality, which for most of us is almost always uncomfortable in some way or another, because we are driven by wants and greeds. And it moves to a point B, which is a point at which we feel that we would be empowered. In the process, we think that this is what we want. And it never is that point that we want. When we reach that point, we move from there to something else that we want. And all of us have discovered this with our own experience. Like in my own corporate career, for a very, very long period of time, almost about 30 odd years, it was about, I needed to reach here, I needed to be a CEO, I needed to make my millions, and so on and so forth. But it never stopped. The greed always grew and grew and grew. So somebody asked a question about a success. So what is it that you define as a success at the end of the day? Is the success happiness? Is that really the journey of happiness, or is the destination of happiness? Because the destination, like samadhi, is only a gateway. It opens up into something else and opens up and opens up. And that is what I term as emergence in a much more philosophical way. Now, when we talk about other words like convergence, which ICF is very happy about. To me, it talks about the past. The convergence happened in the past. The convergence doesn't happen in the future. The future is always an emerging future. It's an emergence. And perhaps it diverges. And it opens up. It opens up with new vistas, new possibilities. And I heard you, just as I stepped in, talking about listening. So what are those things that we need, whether it's for learning in some context or another, or even coaching, which is in a sense a form of learning, or helping another person to learn about themselves in terms of creating awareness. If you were to put all this together as processes which help us to emerge with some awareness, the process itself is both evocative and provocative to be able to help towards that emergence. So what are the multiple features that need to happen? So some of the things that we look at, like you said, Swami Purnananda said, it's about the empathy and connection and having the relationship with a person. And also it is about the deep listening, and in a very humble way, then asking, how does that lead into something more meaningful for you as an emergence? So that is something based on your experience, if you would like to talk about. How have you created that emergence in the people that you have worked with?
So I will skip the word emergence and try to address it in a slightly different way. I have been very concerned for the last 20 years that people who are 18, they are adults, they can do anything, but they can't work. They have to go through one more degree. They feel emotionally unprepared. The world has told them they can't work. In India, at least, it's very, very strong. They have to ride the bus for another 3-4 years before they can meaningfully contribute work in society. I have felt this is the greatest disservice we can do to 18-year-olds in our country. I don't believe that 18-year-olds need to be, further schooled in a zone. We have already entered the zone of lifelong learning. I have been watching and I've been telling my students that by the time they get to college and get out, the knowledge would have become obsolete. The knowledge doubling every 2.5 years. We have a paradoxical situation. And therefore, my effort is to try and see what happens to human beings. What is it that blocks them from celebrating life, being self-directed, being able to meet opposition, being able to meet failure, embracing failure? What stops them from that? And often one finds that the childhood experiences have already formed you in some way, and that's got crystallized. And then in the climate that we have of interactions among each other, we receive the negatives, we don't know what positives we have, and we can't find our courage to explore really open-endedly, because always people ask, where are you headed? What is the end result going to be? And this creates such a crisis. Therefore, recently, I have two kinds of very interesting situation which I can present to you. I see people who have passed out our environment, our ecosystem. And several of them, 18, 19, 20, 21, come back to teach for short periods of time. One young lady even came for teaching for a year. And we have newer teachers who are coming, qualified, studied in college, who are the new millennials who are coming in also to work in our schools. The rooting and the grounding in the fundamentals, clarity, is distinctly different that we are able to notice. We see that the people who have had conversations every week in Pathshala with adults have been available to them. There are conversations at dining tables. There are conversations which we call culture classes. They discuss everything. They discuss the political situation. They discuss justice. They discuss difficulties that they have with their parents. They talk about the pressures that they feel from society. There's a clearinghouse for conversation. But none of these are new. These are all age-old things. People have had all these issues. But is there legitimate space to talk about gender and all the other issues, the violence, the attitudes which were so deeply ingrained? I think the new education and this emergence that you're talking about will have to be grounded in reality. We'll have to provide space for people to explore non-judgmentally, to be able to state, to be able to reframe their location. They'll have to find a way of reframing their location. It's okay to have a position, and when you examine it, to put it aside and not think that one is failing because one is reframing one's location. Yes, sir. So I would call this ability to stay alive in a dialogue, I would I would connect it to what you were saying.
Okay, we have roughly another, I think, 3-4 minutes. So let me try and put this together with as much clarity I can get, and perhaps you have some time to add. I'll take the last bit that you talked about. Instead of reframing location, let me look at what if we completely disrupt location? What if we completely disrupt time and space by means of which learning is today measured? Why is it that somebody has to do 18 years of schooling or 4 years of some college and some stupid years of masters in business administration or some totally idiotic stuff, or in coaching so many hours or whatever it is? And in locations which are defined by certain classrooms, and this is how it is being disseminated. All that has happened with the COVID is the classroom has disappeared and the Zoom room has appeared. But if we were to look at education, like the way that you said, it's about real life, it's about life solutions, it's about work solutions, and so on and so forth. Why is it not possible to disassociate ourselves from the time and space concept, but measure learning in a different way? The evidencing of learning is based on certain criteria, which are not about purely a job-related or destination-related. One of the things last time I was trying to remember the guy who said this. I told you when in the school where our children studied, and I used to be part of the committee of the school. And there was this headmaster who was a Harvard-educated guy, but amazing guy, an Irishman, Niall Nelson. He said once when we asked him, and he said that in a convocation meeting of when the kids graduated, that what I would like to see you as, the only challenge that I had and the only journey that I wanted you to perform was at the end, when you leave the school, that you are all responsible adults, ready to face life. Nothing else. Not that you score these many grades and go here, whatever it is. If that you have learned through this portals of the school as you leave this portal, I think you would have done justice to whatever we tried to do for you. And that's the same thing in any education, whether it's a coaching education or whether it is some other form of education. We tend to look at it as a time-space constraint kind of stuff, and which is what is being imposed on us by all these various institutions, which say, in order for you to get this 3-letter, 4-letter qualifications, this is what you need to do. And of course, a learning evidencing is a part of it. But why not, if that learning evidence is all of it, and the time and the space is irrelevant, can we then disrupt the way that we learn today in every which way? And that is what I hope the future would look like. I'll finish, you add on, and then Arvind can come in and close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No, I think that was very important what you were saying, but maybe I'll use certain different words for it. I'd like to say that the disruptions, we don't have to go looking for them. They are all around us. Our lives are being severely disrupted. In fact, there's a challenge to our creativity, our responsiveness, and we seem to be coming up short. When the COVID hit us, and I have written about this, if we could have gone back to the older schooling model of 10 children, 12 children, 15 children with one adult in every block of flats or wherever, whichever little community, the whole country would Upanishad to sit beside kind of education. You have seen each other's faces. Children would have had some adult to echo to them, not just the primary adult in the home, some adult to echo to them that they matter and their voice can be heard. They would have had interactions. We lost it. We closed our schools and we couldn't find alternative creative solutions. This is so tragic. So disruption we don't have to go look for. But I think the big disruption that we need to ask is that is more better than less. We live in a society which is failing us with things and therefore handing this to the next generation to carry forward. And I think, therefore, this 18 is a very important number when young people become adults. At that time, if they can learn to live with very little, then they can explore. The possibilities for exploration are many. And out of those explorations, something will emerge, something will come, something new will happen. But most important, I think they need to have the courage at that age to be able to move and not feel intimidated and invalidated, and therefore lose the opportunity to create their own future. Thank you. I think I'll close now. I think it's spoken very long. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ram, and thank you, Gautamaji. Actually, I would really like to tell that by listening to both of you, the time went so fast, and also to reflect that when we hear from some of the what you call as the leaders or sort of some of the experts like you, we don't need to go and read many books, right? And that was the one we experienced today. And I really could see that a lot of disruption is opportunities there in our learning system, and there is also there within ourselves, which Ram you brought about disruption in not getting distracted, and the disruption in actually breaking the whole rules of education system and making and Gautamaji, you talked about disruption in people taking the lead in discovering themselves, correct, and with limitless opportunities and try to accept the failures in a very sportively and move on. And coming to the context of coaching for growth and this topic, I think when we go and again play this and here, I think lot of lessons comes to the coach who actually get stumbled during the start of coaching, or as you rightly told Ram, people just go for the letter words. But now listening to you, it is more of an inner change, and then disrupting themselves and the system is going to be the important participation of coaches in the future arena. Thank you once again, both Mr. Ram and Mr. Gautama, for this wonderful session. And I hope whole audience have enriched their knowledge in terms of how the ancient Indian system can actually integrated in the modern learning system. Thank you once again, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Arvind. Thanks, Gautama. Wonderful talking to you. So we'll connect again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ram.